Well, if we're going to talk about forgiveness and condemnation and mercy and all of that stuff, I think we should talk about traffic. I don't know about you. By the way, they have made a mess of Dixie here, haven't they? There's like a light every 60 feet now, and then the left turn. My blood was boiling just coming here this morning. What a mess. There's that one intersection. Okay, I could go on and on, right? I mean, it really doesn't make any sense to me, but there's my confession to you. What I really wanted to talk about, it's so funny, I thought about how traffic does hit this for me very well in terms of how I see other people. When I was a novice, someone said to me, and I had the visitation again this morning, and they chortled as they do very rarely in the monastery. When I said, I was taught this in novitiate. It was one of those things that I'd rather not have been taught, which if you've never been in a novitiate, it isn't funny, but they all win. Because that's what happens in the novitiate. Stuff's just thrust right in front of you. And what was thrust in front of me that day, I know where I was sitting when this was said, was, you're not stuck in traffic. You are traffic. I don't want to think of it that way. I'd prefer that I continue to be the center of my universe and all of you are in my way, right? It's so funny. I know better here, but in the busyness of life, that's what's happening there. As I'm sitting at that light going, why is there a left turn light even on in Sunday? There's nobody turning left here, but I'm going to sit for an extra 20. Okay, I promise I'll stop. Because that's not even the story I wanted to tell you, but I love God being like, here, you thought that was a good story? Try this one today. But here's the one from my work at the Speedway. I've worked with a lot of traffic engineers. And engineers are brilliant people, but traffic is one of those things, this happens a lot in our world these days, where everyone is sure they know better than the people who've actually studied this. And as one engineer said to me, you can't be outstanding in traffic as an engineer unless you are out standing in traffic. You just wouldn't know what it is. Well, I worked in traffic at the Speedway for almost 20 years. And so I learned all these fascinating things. One of them is, if you stop a car at the gate of the Speedway and traffic is backed up a mile, which is not uncommon at the Speedway, to stop that car and let them ask you a question for about 10 seconds has a 35-minute impact on the end of the line because it's exponential to each car. So while this person says, I just have a quick question, I'm sure the person at the end of the line would prefer that I say, move it on, honey, move it on. Get parked and we'll talk to you, right? But part of it is the understanding and seeing ourselves as connected together. You're the traffic, folks. Get over it. I'm trying. We got to get over it. Because if we don't see ourselves as part of the problem, we'll never see ourselves in need of a solution. And we'll never be able to take our suffering and our struggle and connect it to his suffering, which is salvific. And if we don't do that, then our suffering is just for the heck of it, I guess. So the traffic example that I wanted to give you was merge zipper. Most people hate this concept. You're on the expressway and it's going to come down to one lane. And most people feel like you should get over as soon as possible because that's responsible, and that those people who zip all the way up to the front and cut in, well, those people will get theirs on Judgment Day. But actually, engineers would tell you that's actually the fastest way for everyone to get through, is to fill both those lanes as long as you can, and then, if we would be willing to do this, you go, and then I go, and then you go. But no, that doesn't feel right to most people, does it? In fact, often you'll see a semi or someone named Geoff Rose who tries to drive between the two lanes. Now, I don't do that because the traffic engineer convinced me of it, but it took him a few years to convince me of it. It just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel fair, and it doesn't feel like it would actually make it faster, but it is. And so there are a trillion insights like that we will never get to if we're sure we're right. And there's a little part of us that is sure we're right. Right? I don't know many people that go, well, this position I have, it's just irrational, but once in a while we can tap at it. But we've got to be able to let the light shine in on us to see it. Or we'll never forgive. We'll never see the value of forgiveness. We'll just keep pointing out the hurt and harm that others have caused us. rather than ask the next question, which would be logical, which is, what is their pain that put them in a position to cause me that hurt? Right? Same with the traffic. I don't know why this traffic right now does what it does, but I've got to come to a point where I say, well, there's got to be a reason for it. I shouldn't assume that everything has been done to inconvenience me or hurt me. That's why I come back to saying, if we don't see ourselves as connected in the problem, we'll never be able to cross the bridge to say, we're connected in needing a Savior. We'll start to really overly personalize our sin and never think of it on a more corporate or global scale. How you and I live in this country impacting people in other countries, or how you and I live in this neighborhood, how it impacts other people. If we miss that opportunity, it's a very small faith. And quite frankly, it's a me and Jesus faith. And there just isn't a lot of support for that in the gospel, and there's certainly zero support for that in this Eucharist. It's for all, that this salvific act is universal, not global. Sometimes people say, do you believe in extraterrestrials? I don't know, certainly possible. Well, what does that mean for Jesus? Nothing. Nothing different. He's God. It's a universally salvific act. And so we come back to ourselves and say, how do I see it? How do I see myself in my need to be saved, to say that I am I'm not just in the traffic, I am the traffic. Last insight I had this morning on this was, I would imagine if on Holy Saturday, in Jesus' day, so they're all out there yelling, crucify him. I would imagine if you could go interview those people the next day, there isn't 4 people in that crowd that would think they were responsible for his death. I think most of them would tell you something like, oh yeah, I was on my way to the market, this huge crowd kicked up, and they were yelling about this guy, and they probably don't even remember that they were part of it. They're part of the problem here. They're the traffic. Oh, but that was the crowd. Well, newsflash, in the end, there is no the crowd. There's no one to blame this on but ourselves. And we'll never see the need to be people that are forgiving, to stop the condemnation, to stop the judgment, if we can't be honest about, we're the traffic, people. We're the traffic. And that's true in our country, that's true in our church, that's true in our race, that's true in our language groups. You insert the neuralgic problem, and you will find the solution is in the one who opened his arms, spread out his arms in ultimate vulnerability, and said, you slap that cheek, go ahead and have this one. And he's calling us to love people, not just because we're gonna win them over. That he didn't in that sense, right? He didn't win them over by loving them. But in that maturity, he taught them something, and he's teaching it to us. He's giving us an opportunity to say, this is what maturity looks like. Now, you and I, we're not going to do this on our own. If we could, we would have already. My best friend, Father Joe, made this point this morning where he said, sometimes people say, Father, I can't forgive this person. And he always says to him, how do you know? How do you know you haven't forgiven them? Well, that's a great question, isn't it? Well, I get angry every time I think about them. Well, your feelings are important, but they don't define completely who you are. And just because you're still working through a deep hurt, being wounded that way, that doesn't mean you haven't forgiven them. Let it start with the prayer. Lord, help me to forgive them. Help me to love the wound in them that wounded me. Do you see what I'm saying? Then you're connecting our wound, and then you go, the wound that we gave you that saved us. That's where the whole thing changed. It used to be, I got wounded, and in my pain I wound you. And here's the Son of God saying, I got wounded by your pain, and I saved you. I conquered it all for you. The same thing that can cause the ripple of pain created the ripple of light and life and peace and mercy. And so then you hear Jesus, stop it, stop the condemnation, stop the judgment. However you measure it, that's how you're going to get measured. And because traffic reminds me of it so powerfully, I don't want to measure with the stick of condemnation and judgment. I want to measure with the stick of mercy. Because while I've given Jesus a million reasons not to love me, he hadn't taken me up on any of them. My selfishness, my missed opportunities to love him, serve him, none of them has he taken up to say, you're right. He just keeps forgiving. He just keeps offering himself to me in this Eucharist and to you as well. That's the God that called us here this morning to bring it all, our successes and our failures, our magnanimous, selfless acts and our very selfish ones, and just lay them down here. And let those things we've done that wound him, let that lead us back to our salvation. Because I said, if we bring all of our brokenness together, then and only then can we cross the bridge to say, we've been saved. And then your suffering and my suffering has a salvific value. And then this Eucharist that we will take within us really can change the world. It's an invitation, it's an opportunity, but we have to start by being honest with ourselves and then let him do the impossible task of teaching us how to love, to forgive, to not judge, to let go of all that. As I said, not because it wins everyone over, that isn't necessarily it, but because it sets us free. And when we testify to that well, people take note. So let us accept the challenge, prepare our hearts to receive him in this Eucharist. May God be praised.